If you ever struggle to find your style, Visual Alchemy is the shortcut. This is the biggest secret weapon used by all your favorite artists. They are masters at this. If you want to stylize your art better, all you have to do is study Visual Alchemy. And once you learn it, it changes everything. But this isn't just theory. It's something practical that you can apply. But what exactly is Visual Alchemy? And how do you make it practical? So let's break it down. Alchemy is an ancient practice used to transforming matter like lead into gold by breaking down materials into their core components and combining them in different ways. And visual alchemy is where we do that visually. We break things down into simple shapes and change them and combine them in new ways and transform how they look, feel, and even what they mean. It's like distilling a person's essence into a caricature and boiling down the details and amplifying what matters. Or you can think about it as playing with Lego bricks. Take it apart, swap pieces, and create something entirely different. I'm gonna break it down into 4 practical steps that you can implement into your workflow. And as always, we start with the vibe. First, you figure out what you want to achieve with the drawing, right? This is the emotional tone. You set the intention. And then you break it down, reduce it into pure, simple shape essence. And next you play with the elements using visual logic and design principles. And finally you reconstruct it with style and clarity. But why bother with all this? Well, there are a couple of reasons. One of them is efficiency. Simplifying into simple shapes frees up lots of mental space. You draw faster, learn faster, think clearer, and you recall better. You basically have more mental bandwidth. Another reason is storytelling. Because our brains are really good with shapes, and shape is like the language of the visual cortex. And what you emphasize with shapes tells the story. And you don't just stylize your art, you supercharge the storytelling. And my favorite reason is stylization. This is how your taste becomes visible. By making the design choices intentionally, you have more control over your style and it can be flexible. But before we dive into these 4 steps, you need some tools in your belt. So think of these as your alchemical instruments. Okay, so we start with the drawing methods. When it comes to drawing, you have the observational method, which is the traditional method where you draw what you see, basically. And then you have the formulaic method where you use abstract concepts and design principles to recreate the subject with shapes and forms. And then you have the hybrid method, which is a combination of both. For the sake of the tutorial, I'm gonna focus on formulaic method. And then we have the tools like lines, shapes, forms, C curves, S curves, straights, rectangles, ellipses, boxes, spheres. All these are our alphabet. If you can draw these, you can draw anything. And then we have the visual reads. So this is basically how our brains work. Our brains are really good with shapes. And when we look at something, we perceive the biggest shape first, ideally the silhouette. And then if you stop and focus on it, you start to analyze the medium-sized shapes. And if you really zoom in, you start to see the little details. Right, so first, second, and third read. Generally speaking, working in this order is a good idea. Okay, and then we have the 3-step approach. I've made a dedicated video on this topic, so if you haven't already, check that out. But to put it simply, it goes something like this. We start with capturing the energy, capturing the vibe, drawing the gesture with rhythm lines, and then we build on top of that gesture with shapes, forms, and establish the structure. And finally, we refine it with clarity and finesse. That's the representation stage. I call these something different every time, but the idea is this, okay? Don't get caught up in words. And I'll be using these concepts as a guiding principle to explain what visual alchemy is. And I go way deeper on these topics in my figure drawing course. So if you want to learn more, hop into the course and we get you started. I'll put the links in the description. Alright, now you got the tools. Let's start the transformation. And like all powerful creations, it starts with intention. So first step is the vibe. Before you even draw a line, set the intention. So ask yourself, what do I want to achieve with the drawing? Right, so this is the vibe check, the emotional tone. This is the soul of the piece. So take a couple of minutes and, do a quick audit. What do you want to tell or emphasize or express about the subject? What story are you telling? What stands out to you about the subject? Or even what makes it worth drawing? This is like your unique take, because we all value and see different things even when we are looking at the same thing. Okay, now you set the emotional tone and the intention. We move on to the next stage, which is breakdown. Now we reduce it to its essence. Strip the subject down into its raw, simple shape essence and cut through all the noise and the details and, see the essence. This would be the calcination stage in alchemy. Burn away all the fluff to see the truth. So this is where you break it down into simple shapes and forms. Ideally, if you are not familiar with this concept, I would say start with the shapes first because they are easier to manage, and then you can move on to forms. Because if you think about it, shapes represent forms, right? So starting with the shapes is a better step. And they are easier to manage. And use rectangles, triangles, ellipses. Keep it dead simple. Because when you do that, you are training your brain to see through the noise. Alright, so let's look at some examples. When it comes to choosing what to pick in terms of shapes or the body parts, you can approach it categorically, but it's not a rule, right? So keep an open mind. For example, on the top one, I went with that cylinder part of the head, and on the middle, I just exaggerate the neck, right? That's a simple shape. Or you can go with the biggest shape, right? So this is all flexible. You can go with the first read or second read or third read. It's completely up to you, right? You can apply some design principles or some concepts on this part and, categorize if it helps, like structure, mass, gesture, or the body parts. But don't get rigid, right? This is alchemy, not anatomy class. So you can pick anything, right? You can simplify however you want. And once you boiled it down into its purest form, now comes the part that separates masters from imitators, which is remixing with purpose. Now this is my favorite part. This is where you stop copying and start recreating from understanding. So you've broken the subject into its raw elements. Now it's time to remix those pieces. So here, play with the elements using visual logic and design principles, while keeping in mind the initial intention and purpose of the piece, which is you telling a story or expressing an idea or an emotion. And push, pull, stretch, compress, twist the shapes, bend all the rules, and make choices that serve your intention. Exaggerate the parts that matter and, kill what's boring, add some rhythm, weight, some attitude. This is where you inject your personality into the piece. While it's important to be authentic at this stage, at the same time stylize with purpose. Not just for cool points, but to make the vibe hit harder. So let's look at some more examples. So here you can see I picked the hair and the nose and the lips. And this is not even a finished drawing. This is just a sketch. But you can get the idea. Basically what we are doing here is picking the hair and then, changing the shape or exaggerating the curves of the shape. And finally we end up with something like this. And again here I'm going with the biggest shape, right? The shape of the head, and exaggerating the glasses and the eyes. So it's just emphasizing the overall vibe, right? On this one I'm just, emphasizing this lady's vibe. You can even change the vibe. You can add your own vibe to it. So that's the idea. And on this one, again, I'm picking some facial features, like making the ear so much bigger and kind of simplifying and stylizing the shape of the nose and the ear and the chin. And you can see I'm kind of exaggerating the rhythm lines as well. So you have virtually infinite ways to emphasize or amplify the vibe or change the vibe. And again, on this one, same idea, going with the biggest shape, just picking the biggest shape and then just modifying it. And then everything just fits into its place, right? And then you end up with something like this. Okay, so you get the idea, right? There are infinite possibilities you can play with. And once you've warped the elements and you come up with something nice and something you like, next you bring it all home. It's time to fuse everything into a new whole. This is where the gold shows up, right? It's like soul, design, structure, everything snaps into alignment and they all click. This is the last stage where we reconstruct and rebuild what we did. Now you pull it all back together. And this is where it becomes yours. You explored, played, and reshaped the raw material. And now you are no longer copying reality, you are recreating from understanding. And that's so much fun. You choose what stays, what to push, what to polish, and this is all intentional, right? Not accidental. And the best part is when you do this, even though the end result might be completely different in terms of the likeness or resemblance, usually what happens is you end up with a similar vibe. So that's the idea. You are not trying to make it look right, you are trying to make it feel true. So this is the goal. This is visual alchemy. And as you practice this, it becomes second nature. And then it's so much fun and it's so satisfying. So you can see here, I'm going with something different every time. And that's the whole point about art, right? You know, our unique take, right? Your specific view of the subject. And as I said, you know, this can be so flexible, right? Whatever your style is, you can stretch it to almost fit anything. So what's next? You repeat it over and over again. Every time you loop through these stages, you unlock something new and different. So put into practice, you'll get so much better in this and it becomes second nature and it's so much fun and satisfying. So yeah, this is not just a trick. This is a mindset, right? This is a way of looking. This is like a lens. So let's recap what we talked about. First, set the intention, set the emotional tone, and then break the subject down into its simplest shapes and forms, and play with the elements using visual logic and design principles and remix with style, and finally, rebuild with purpose. And if you want to master all these, we go deep onto these in my figure drawing course. So click the link below and join the course, and we get you started. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you real soon. Peace.